Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to Holding Space with Claire Bidwell-Smith and Wilfred Labiosa. My name is Andy Engel, and I'm Senior Programmer at Reimagine. I'm joined here today with Derek Cosberg, also part of Team Reimagine. And as a nonprofit organization, we spark community experiences just like this one that empowers individuals, families, and communities to face the hardest parts of our existence, including illness and death, while inspiring people to celebrate life and one another. In much of our fall programming, we focused on the theme of grief, growth, and action, and we've been leaning into the theory and practice of post-traumatic growth, how it's possible for many to develop and transform from the source of our losses. And we'll continue to explore post-traumatic growth in the spring. And we're going to add an additional layer to it, social justice. How do acts of service in our communities, our efforts in civic engagement, and social justice play a role in our healing? I want to thank our 2021 sponsors. They're shown here. They support Reimagine and make all of this work possible. The majority of us are zooming in from the United States, also known as Turtle Island by Native Americans and their allies. Please join me in acknowledging Indigenous communities, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. This land acknowledgement demonstrates a commitment to begin the process of dismantling the ongoing legacies of colonialism. I'm in Lenapehoking, also known as New York City. Please tell us where you're from. Dara, if you may, can you please put in the chat www.native-land.ca, and then you can all see what Indigenous territory you're located in, and please post it in the chat where you're calling in from. And now, I would like to introduce Claire Bidwell-Smith, grief therapist and author and the host of Holding Space, and Wilfred Labiosa, who has now become a regular, just like Claire, at Reimagine. So Wilfred, he has been working in public health for more than 25 years, and he particularly works with LGBT and Latino communities, both in the US and in Puerto Rico. And he has such a wide variety of experience working in mental health, substance abuse. He has worked in HIV/AIDS prevention, homeless youth he's worked with. And we had the pleasure of working with him on several Reimagine programs now, particularly our Table Talk series. And he was born and raised in Puerto Rico. He is zooming in from Puerto Rico. And he is currently executive director and CEO of Waves Ahead, a nonprofit organization in Puerto Rico focusing on the elder and LGBTQ+ communities. And you can learn more about them at wavesahead.org. And now that's it. And I'm going to pass this over to the wonderful Claire Bidwell-Smith. Thank you so much, Claire.
Thank you, Andy and Dara and Reimagine. I'm so always happy to be here for another Holding Space show. And I'm so excited to have Wilfred with us today. Thank you for joining us, Wilfred. I would love to have you just start by telling us about yourself and your background and your work.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for this invitation, and it's becoming my extended family. And thank you so much, Andy and Claire, for making this space. My name is Wilfred Labiosa, and I am originally from Puerto Rico, otherwise known as Borinquen. That's our native island name of our natives. I graduated from high school, Catholic school, and I will mention why that important in my upbringing later on in our conversation. But I moved to Boston to study psychology and clinical social work, and then I stayed, and I lived there for over 27 years in Boston, and I did a lot of work with the Latino community, always searching for those individuals who look like me or who I saw myself in them, just because I felt more like home. And so I called Boston my second home, away from home. And also I called Cuba my other home away from home, because I've been doing for the last 20 years a lot of work in Cuba with the community, LGBT community, and the elders throughout Cuba, and trying to build this bridge of communication and conversation and of helping each other through these tough times that we have been living in, including during COVID. Um, my upbringing is and my training is in psychology and clinical social work. I graduated with a doctorate from Simmons University in social work, and another doctorate from Cuba, University of La Habana, in psychology. And so that is my upbringing. But really, I have been able to adapt those theories that I have learned to really work with the community and to really making them a safe space for them to come and explore their mental health, their traumas, and their histories with me.
That's amazing. That's such incredible work. Thank you for doing that. Um, I started this series last year in, I guess, maybe April when COVID was, when we were really all going into lockdown here in the States. And I just, we were all trying to figure out what was happening and our new lives that we were dealing with and all the anxiety and grief that was coming with everything. And this was just a place to hold space and explore all of those topics. And we've had all these incredible people come on, and it's been so fascinating to hear about COVID and grief and how it's affected different communities and different kinds of people and how we're moving through it and how we are transforming in many ways. And I would just love to kind of hear about that from your perspective. How has COVID been in your communities, and how has it impacted the way that you're growing or changing and grieving?
Well, grieving has been a process for me for many years. I think people ask me that same similar question. And I say that since the HIV/AIDS epidemic, I have been grieving, and I have been grieving more my brothers and sisters that we have lost due to HIV and AIDS. And although we have some years of recuperation, of getting some stabilization, then we had the hurricanes here in Puerto Rico, and then we had the earthquakes, and then COVID. What has been different with COVID is this connection that we have, this accessibility to people that are away from here, from Puerto Rico. So I'm able to connect with all of you. I've been able to connect not only with friends, but with my colleagues and my mentors that I have. It's very different to talk on the phone than to see each other. And I think that has brought me some peace to be able to search for them, and they are open to dialoguing with me about my own grief and the grief, community grief that we have, and the community trauma that we have. Um, I think, since 2015, I have been dealing personally with my own grief. My father died all of a sudden in 2015. And then my mom died in 2017 at the end. And then my aunt. So although I moved here to Puerto Rico, back home, to take care of my mom, it has also taught me how my own grief, I can work with the grief of others and be able to support each other through these troubling times that we have had so much loss in our community and in our backyard and with ourselves.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so sorry about those losses. I lost both of my parents as well, and it's a lot. I think grief reaches into all areas of our lives, and just touches us in so many different ways and asks a lot of us to kind of figure out who we are and where we are in the world and in our lives. But what are the ways that you found that have been helpful to help others move through grief, particularly in the last, with all of these like huge things that have been happening in Puerto Rico, earthquakes and hurricanes and COVID and just so much. What's been helpful in terms of moving through grief?
You know, I have always learned that it is important to take care of oneself. And although people think that, oh, you're just you're taking time for yourself when you're supposed to do the work with others and for others. And I feel like if one doesn't take care of oneself, we cannot take care of the other. And that would be detrimental to them and to their own grief process. I always try to take time for myself, but at the beginning of the pandemic, I wasn't doing that because there was so much work that I needed to do with my staff and with my colleagues, that I wasn't taking care of myself. And I think COVID forced me also to see that that was important because I could not do anything outside of my home. So I had to stay at home. And that taught me take care of yourself and then take care of the other. That's the important part. And, you know, COVID has been teaching all of us so many different things. But one of the things is that life is precious and that we need to take care of each other and of oneself every moment of the day. And that is important, you know, that is important. Even if it's that half hour, 15 minutes, you know, before jumping in this call, you know, we were saying how the beach is all around me, you know, and I need to take care of that in the sense of going, putting, driving myself to the beach and just breathing that fresh air for at least 10 minutes or a day. And I just don't do it, but that's is my fault because of the hectic days that we live. But we need to take care of oneself. It is so important to do so.
It really is, and I'm with you. It's I have to remind myself to really take care of myself, and it's just a lot. There's so much need out there. There's so much work to do, but you're right. We cannot do that unless we are taking care of ourselves.
And doing those rituals, you know, I think those rituals are so important to us. And those rituals can be as simple as breathing and some mindfulness every morning or every evening, or even going for a walk. You know, it doesn't have to be, you know, people always hear the word rituals and they think, oh, a spiritual, or you need to start doing a dance or a drum or some. No, it has to be a simple thing that makes it part of you and that it brings you grounded to what you're living every day.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things, I mean, like you said, COVID has been teaching us so much. But one of the interesting things that I thought came out of like the early months of COVID were we were unable to have our usual customs of funerals and memorial services and, going to church or, places of worship. And we were kind of forced to create our own rituals at home and within our own lives. And I thought that that was really interesting and a kind of opportunity for us to realize that we don't always need to rely on the usual ways that we've ritualized our lives, and to be more creative within our own ideas about it. Did you see that happening in Puerto Rico? How did you guys cope with not being able to have funerals and memorials during such a difficult time?
I think is I'm going to talk about my own experience. I think it was rough. My aunt died a month into COVID, not of COVID, but natural causes, but in March. So it was really hard for us to do the whole ritual that we as a family do. And one of the things that we did was, her ashes, we kind of was able to connect to the family. And so we were able to do it because of technology, and they were able to be here present although they were not here physically present. Um, and the other thing that we did as an organization is we started to teach individuals how to create their own altars, um, to that they could do it on their home, very simple with a shoebox. And the videos are still available. You can see them
Really?
online
That's
in our
amazing. I want to
YouTube
see those.
channel.
Dara, can you
Yeah,
put like a link in there for them? I want
yeah,
to.
we'll definitely looking sending you the link so you can share them. And the other thing is just to do altars. Altars don't have to be in a church. Altars can be with yourself in your own space. And that was what is important for us, that to teach others that we don't have to go to an actual building.
Mhm.
That building, the concept of that building can be in with you, in your own space, in your home. I'm connecting with you from this room, which is our meditation room, that we developed to do that, to provide a space for individuals to come and meditate and to grieve before they go into their sessions in the other space of the community center. And COVID hit. So instead, what we needed to do is transmit this space and the sounds of water and visuals so that people can meditate in their own space. And it was so hard, for people to do that translation in a sense that, okay, I don't have to go there physically. I can go and do it in my home. It
Yeah.
was so different for them. But even with their phone, they can just connect and listen. If they cannot connect visually, and if they can connect visually, they can get both things. It's so important to develop those spaces. And not to overuse the title, but really holding that space,
Yeah.
where you live, where you work, where you're at, and make it your own.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was such an interesting thing that we had become so reliant on other people's spaces and other places to go. And I think what's important is that we do create time and a moment to ritualize things, to just light a candle at night and think about our person, to just have a minute where we're immersed in that, whether it's at home or somewhere else. And I think that I think it was really kind of lovely for people to realize how much they could be doing that on their own, even when it was such a difficult time.
And being creative
Yeah,
also gives you some time to pay attention to what you're doing, do some mindfulness and some grounding, and it will help you also process your anxiety that you have about what's going on around you and within your community and within your household. Those important moments gives you more time in the long run.
that's right. What are the main mental health issues you're seeing in Puerto Rico right now, in general, and also just kind of as COVID fallout, you know?
You know, it's interesting, and Andy reminded me to talk about their therapy, and I'll talk about that momentarily. Um, Interesting enough, in Puerto Rico, and people are now starting to talk about it because of COVID.
Mhm.
But in Puerto Rico, for many years, I would like to say for the last 8 years or so, we are confronting a mental health crisis here. Now, the mental health crisis has expanded around the world because of COVID. But here in Puerto Rico is the social isolation, the anxiety that we have because of our economy, and it has impacted the most our elders. And predominantly, the largest percentage of death by suicide or threats by suicide is in our elder. It's not in our youth here in Puerto Rico. That is very different in the States. The bullying, yes, there is some bullying among our youth, but mainly, predominantly, is the anxiety that our elders, and I'm in the last 3 years, it has gone down to 50 years of age and older who are suicide attempts and death by suicide. But a few years back, it started on 65 and older, which is very different. And it's something that we, as a society, don't like to talk about. Um, it is an issue that we need to continue taking care of our mental health in a preventive manner.
Mhm.
This space is a prevention for further isolation, for further anxiety. These type of connections that we all have is a moment that we need to take in order to be able not to feel alone. And that there's so much going on that in Puerto Rico. Our elders are being left here alone in their homes because the youth and the young professionals are going to the States and other parts of the world to find jobs because of our economy. So they leave their older individual here. And that's an issue. You know,
Yeah.
there's so much loneliness. And the other thing is food sustainability. Food sustainability has been an issue here in Puerto Rico for the longest time, and now during COVID, even further. And that is a major problem that we need to face. And government is not doing enough. And government is continuing embezzling money, you know, stealing money from the people. And so it is a shame that they continue doing that, but it is up to us as citizens, of individuals, as professionals who live in the island to be able to support each other.
Mhm.
And we saw it after the hurricanes, we saw it after the earthquakes, and now we're seeing the camaraderie that we have and the connection that we have. But it is up to us to go outside of our comfortable neighborhoods and communities to search for that and to really be able to open your doors and be able to open, you know, with an embrace. COVID has impeded that. You know, we have our new normal, which is to
Yeah.
embrace, you know, from afar, but you know, using your mask and you can hug, you know, and
Yeah.
it's so much that important contact of people.
What are you guys doing for outreach to like connect with the elders who are isolated and at home? I mean, this is such a huge problem. I mean, I think it's happening here too. At least the isolation is such a huge problem that's happening for so many people. But how do you reach them, and what do you do when you do reach them?
Well, we have a weekly radio show here that is heard in the AM radio because that's the radio of our elders here in Puerto Rico, and radio is still the best way to communicate to others here in Puerto Rico in AM radio. So we have that weekly radio show. We also distribute a lot of information in local pharmacies, community, mom and pop pharmacies that support us and that continue bringing that information to the community members, as well as we have connected with the Red Cross, the local chapter, and we have been able to distribute information during the hurricane season about our services. And once we connect with them through our community centers, we even provide them technology so they can connect with us, telephones or laptops or iPads or whatever it is, so they could connect with us and we be able to provide them the therapy that they need and or participation in our support groups. We also provide yoga and meditation. We provide mindfulness groups, music therapy groups. We also provide creative art sessions and educational sessions so that people can learn how to do new things and maybe they didn't want to explore before, but now they have the time so they can do it. We also do movies nights on yeah, a platform.
Okay.
Um, and we try to also we started this program called Dirt Therapy. We really believe in the earth, and we also wanted to make a connection with food sustainability. So what we do is we bring them the seeds and the dirt and pots that if they want to grow in their small space, we give them the pots small enough for their own space, their studio or their bedroom. And if they have a bigger home, we provide them mindfulness techniques so that while they're planting, they can use some of that grounding, some of their therapy techniques in order to be able to grow their own home garden in their own space and be able to bring some green and some fresh air with the greens.
Yeah. That's amazing. That's so lovely. Wow. Are you seeing a lot of anxiety in Puerto Rico?
I suffer from anxiety. We're living in
And
a
most of us
world that
do
is,
at this point, I think.
I think
Yeah.
all of us have anxiety every day. You know, and and my apologies because what you're hearing is people releasing their anxiety. I don't know if you can hear that on motorcycles. So in the main strip behind the center. So I'm glad. Can you hear that or no?
Kind of,
Oh,
not really.
good. Okay. But I'm hearing it right behind this wall. Yes, there is a lot of anxiety. I think if you're a young individual, you may have a different level of anxiety than an older individual. Of course, each anxiety is shown differently at each level. And if you have lost someone because of COVID, your anxiety and sadness may go into depression and other problems. Yes, we have seen it throughout the whole Puerto Rico and around us and around us.
What about children? Are schools going okay? How are the kids doing coming out of COVID?
Oh, school here has been, I think as it's the States, have been crazy. You have school today, you don't have school today. And I think that is producing a whole group of individuals that haven't had the experience of school.
Yeah.
I have to remind you, we had hurricanes in 2017. So that year almost was gone for some individuals. And then the earthquakes. So you were out of school for those. And now COVID, you were out of school. So at least here in Puerto Rico and those impacted by hurricanes and earthquakes, we are creating indirectly a new community that has not had those experiences that I'm assuming like you, Claire, and myself had growing up. And that socialization is being lost. Those skills of socializing, of talking, everybody's on their phones and that is their world. We're losing that and those skills that are so needed to deal with every single day.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think we're learning so much, but there's a lot that we're going to have to kind of figure out how to. I feel like we've had some setbacks with children and with technology and isolation that we're going to really have to figure out how to combat and change as we go forward. What could
And the
we?
government, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but the government continues, federal level or even local level, are just saying that there is a problem. But I don't see them bringing us together, the people who are doing the actual work, to come together to make suggestions on how there's so many simple solutions that we could do on a daily basis until the bigger solutions can come into
Yeah.
our neighborhoods and communities.
What could we be doing better in the States to support Puerto Rico?
Thank you so much for that question. First of all, hey, we're US citizens. So that's first, okay? So we are as much as you are, who is watching here this today. So let's put it that way. Our passport is blue. It has still the eagle, just like yours. And so we should not be treated as third-class citizens because we're not. We go to war, and many of our veterans have died in war because of the freedoms that we all cherish and that we celebrate. So let's remind us of that. And that's the first thing is if you hear something derogatory about Puerto Ricans, um, set them straight, just say Puerto Ricans are US citizens. I think the last administration brought down a lot Puerto Rico. And I think although that was only 4 years, I think it translated into maybe 12 more years of work. Um, and the other thing is support each other. And that goes no matter if you're Puerto Rican or not. We need to support each other and we need to take those moments to actually hear how are you doing. When we ask that question, listen to the answer. And we're so automatic. Let's stop that automatic process and listen and stop. If you don't want to hear it, don't ask the question. Yes. Just go on your routine. Don't ask the question. But if you ask the question, be ready for an answer. How are you doing? How is it going? And so it is so important to listen. And that no matter your race, your ethnicity, or your gender, or our sexual orientation, we need to listen to each other because that could help us lower our anxiety of isolation. Yeah. That could lower our feelings of sadness, of just a neighbor talking to you or even a stranger talking to you. So about Puerto Ricans, that's the first thing. Talk that Puerto Ricans are US citizens and that we deserve the same things as you do. That we're not looking for any different laws. We're just looking for the same laws that you.
Yeah, absolutely. I always think about the word curiosity. I feel like we could be doing better at being curious rather than judgmental or rather than assuming things. Just being curious and asking, rather than assuming that we know what someone's experience is. Yeah, I like the idea of curiosity.
And you can come to Puerto Rico, great, spend money here, that's great. But also, in a sense, if you're going to spend money, spend it on the people who are actually working, who are grassroots, who, we have an excellent ecotourism, entities. Even locally, I have been taking now time to go and do like the chocolate tour, wine tour, and many other tours that we have here of the zip line. And these are important things that if you have that time, explore them and don't assume.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to open it up to questions soon from our audience here and people who are with us. You guys can ask us anything, direct questions to Wilfred or myself, and we're happy to talk about all the kind of issues we've been discussing so far. You can raise your hand or put things in the chat, and we'll just keep talking for a minute. What are your like go-to things that you say to someone who's newly grieving? I'm always curious what do you do when you know someone has just recently gone through a loss and is struggling? What are your go-tos?
First of all, I don't assume that their loss is the same as mine. And I think as humans, we all tend to assume. So my first question is always, what does it mean to you? You know, who it was, and don't assume also that role of that person. Let's say that person says their parents. Well, don't assume that their parents were the same ones as yours and that the grief is the same. And I would also say, what are you doing to take care of yourself now? You know, and how are you mourning the loss? And how are you processing the loss? You know, I may not use those same words, but the concepts are used in our language.
Yeah.
And I would hear them, you know, just listen, listen and don't assume. Those are the two biggest things that I always do when I hear of someone's loss, you know, on death and grieving. So.
Yeah, going back to that curiosity about someone else's experience. I always like to think about the amount of time too. I think people underestimate how long it takes to move through grief. I think that, you know, we grieve for a long time. And so sometimes we forget, or people forget that someone is still grieving, you know, 6 months, a year, 2 years later. So that's something important I think about.
Yeah, my dad died in 2015, and he was a very famous artist here locally. His retrospective has traveled the world, and many people around me say, "Why didn't you go with the exhibit?" And it is because I'm still grieving it, and I cannot see that exhibit that much. I have taken certain places that I go to when the exhibit opens up, but other times I just can't, and we need to respect that. And it's a tough situation. And his art is all around me, right here. That one behind is his piece. That always is reminding me of that he's around me and that he's supporting me indirectly or directly with the energy that we all carry of those spirits around us.
Absolutely. I'm seeing some questions here. Julia wants to know, how do you challenge others' misconceptions around how grief should look, that we should be done with it within some arbitrary time frame? This is kind of what we're talking about. Yeah.
Well, I think this time frame, I would assume that is becoming because of the health insurance companies. You know, the health insurance dictate to you, you only have 8 sessions, you know, or 12 sessions if you're lucky, to grieve. And you're supposed to grieve on that time frame. I think we need to continue educating that it is not an age thing. So it is not, if a young person is grieving, it's the same as an older individual, or that vice versa is longer. We really need to start listening to what the person is telling you. And maybe it's a year, maybe it's 2 years, maybe it's months, weeks, who knows? Because each of us is so different. We only know the context of what happened, but each of us is different. I cannot assume, Claire, that you are a white woman, you know, living in the West Coast, because that experience with someone is different to another woman living in the West Coast with long hair. You know, it's very different. And so we need to start, you know, dialoguing. We're losing that. We're losing that dialogue. So it's.
Yeah, I agree. I saw an interesting amount of grief shaming during COVID. You know, people who would speak on social media about difficulties they were going through or things they were grieving, and then others jumping on and saying, oh, well, you know, other people have it so much harder. But grief is grief, and we're all allowed to grieve no matter who we are. And I think, again, going back to that idea of being curious and allowing other people to have their experience and not assuming that you know what it is really important. Let's see, there's a question here about the Pulse massacre and collective grief. Could you speak on that?
Yeah. Pulse, and I think we have had a program on this, and let's reimagine. Time is now all convoluted, but I think it was last year, or earlier this year. You know, Pulse massacre is something that impacted not only LGBT people, not only Puerto Ricans, but a whole world. If you were in tune with loss, you know, some people tune it out, and that's something else. And the school massacres continue to occur. This was in a club, and we need to continue to learn from those experiences. Continue to learn that we have community trauma, but we also have individualized trauma that we all need to process in one way or another. And that maybe by we're not connected to anyone in Pulse. And so it may not mean as much to you, but you're still impacted by that. You're still impacted by the deaths of COVID. Um, you may not, you may, but I think we as humans, all in our own little ways or our own ways and methods, we still grieve those losses. Um, we we still do rituals, reminding us that they were brothers and sisters of us, that were in that nightclub and that they were all now with us in spirit, not physically, and that we need to continue reminding ourselves of the work that we still need to continue to foster, of LGBT phobia, of homophobia, that we really need to start educating and continue to educate every day, of that we are so diverse and we need to celebrate our intersectionalities. I'm not just a man, a gay man from Puerto Rico. I'm much more than that. And we all need to remember that we all are different than just a human body of a male or a female, that we're more than that. And we need to continue to celebrate our intersectionalities and our diversity. It may not be of skin, it might be of religion, it might be of a spiritual, or it might be of aboriginal status. Whatever it is, we need to start educating each other about our intersectionalities and celebrate it. And Pulse has really, for me, taught me that we need to celebrate our intersectionalities.
Absolutely. I think the concept of collective grief too is a really interesting one. I think sometimes again it's people don't feel permission to grieve for people or things they don't know, but I think it is really important to do that. I think sometimes people feel they don't have a permission because they're not sure what to do with that
Mm,
grief. You know, when we watch something like that happen, watch a school shooting, see a celebrity die,
mhm,
you know, people get confused about what do they do with that grief and those
mhm.
feelings? Do you have any thoughts about what do we do with that?
Not only go to the space that reminds you of that individual or that situation, but also do it in your own home. You
Hmm.
can bring that to your own home so you can at least do your mourning, your grief in your own space and time.
Hmm.
September 11, it has been a while since that occurred. Just before COVID, I was staged in another organization, took me to New York just before all of COVID, and I was able to visit September 11, the memorial that they have there. And until I entered that, I did not realize how still touching it is for me. And I started to cry.
Yeah.
It is so raw still in me that I did not realize it until I was there in the space. And so
Hmm.
that's why I mean that that space doesn't have to be that I went to New York. Maybe you won't be able to go to New York because of financial means that cannot allow you to go there, but just do that own grieving with you. Look for help. There's so much help that is free nowadays, and there's so much support as a community, and there's so much phone numbers that you can call to and continue participating of these spaces.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Thank you. I was also really the 20th anniversary of September 11th this year. It just took me by surprise how much I felt and how much grief came up again from that time period. We can't ever underestimate grief, I think, you know. Jill has a question here. She says, I asked someone whom I'm in a community with who she had lost 3 months ago, and she's not answered the question. I don't want to ignore the loss, but what is the next delicate right action? Wait for her to bring it up, or just say, I'm thinking of you during the holidays?
That's a good thing to say. I'm thinking of you. Don't give up. First of all, don't give up on her, on your neighbor, on that community member. Maybe don't continue asking the question, but just do it in different ways. If you know how to cook, and you feel cooking, maybe share some of the cooking with the other person. Food always brings us together. Food is always a good segue to just do that bridge. Maybe you're from different cultures or maybe different religious backgrounds, but food, hey, it always brings us together.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a good way to do that bridge and to fostering that relationship until that person feels comfortable with you to open up about it. You may know that it was 3 months ago. You may know that it's a year ago. For them, it was yesterday, maybe. So for them, that time period doesn't exist. So you need to honor that, you need to respect that, and just look for different ways. If they like to chew bubble gum, hey, give them a little piece of chocolate or bubble gum or whatever it is, to just do that bridge.
Yeah, I love that. Bridges are good. Just, yeah, showing up, continuing to let them know that you're here in any way that that works.
And you don't have to spend money either. Let's say that's not in your means,
Yeah,
just to show up physically, just a hello, and that's enough until the person can open up.
yeah. Another question says, when you said we're still grieving the losses, does breaking up from a relationship count as the same thing in the concept of grieving? Because I know a friend that are still sad and crying over this person for 3 years now. They're grieving their loss over a relationship instead of losing someone over death. Is it the same thing?
From a standpoint of a mental health care provider, yes. We need to treat our losses as our losses. And as I say, it's our losses. It is their loss. It's not yours. So you need to respect that. Although you may know as a friend that that wasn't good for them, they take time to get to the point where you're at. So you need to provide that space and that time for them to realize that and to be able to grieve that loss. It is a loss, physically or non-physically. It is a loss.
I think divorce, the end of a marriage, I think a
Mm-hmm.
friendship breakup, or if you need to take space from a family member, that's all very difficult. And I think there's a lot of grief there. And then there's this complicated factor of that they are still alive. So there's this
Mm-hmm.
part of you that is, I think, always wondering or hoping if it could change, even when you know it won't or can't. But that's difficult. I think we've all been through
Mm-hmm.
a friendship breakup, say, and I have ones I still think about here and there.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult. I think we do need to have our respect for that grief process as well. Yeah, thank you for that question. Well, Wilfred, thank you so much. Where can we find you? How can people reach out to you and find more about you and support you and all the good stuff?
Well, they can look for Waves Ahead. I think Andy has put it in the chat earlier. Is wavesahead.org, and you can find all about us and all about the work that we do here in Puerto Rico in the website. If you have access to Facebook or Twitter and all those things, you can find us as Waves Ahead as well, or Sage Puerto Rico. If you live in the States and you're part of one of those affiliates of Sage, they all know about us and they can connect you to Sage work here in Puerto Rico. And really, we have an open door policy here in Puerto Rico, and that goes to you. If you ever come to Puerto Rico and you just want to take a moment to talk to someone, to a stranger here in Waves Ahead, come to our doors. We will receive you and we will be able to, process with you. We know Spanish, English, and so we're open to that. And it is so important to build our community again. And this event is building community. It's about connecting to each other and not losing that touch of our human touch that is so important in these times, these tough times that we're living.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing. I hope to see you in Puerto Rico at some point. I think that would be wonderful. Thanks to everybody who showed up today. I really appreciate this community, people coming together, holding space for these conversations and these topics. I think it's so important. This is how we create change. And I'm always grateful to Reimagine and to Dara and Andy. Thank you guys so much. Do you have some other exciting events coming up you want to tell us about?
Yes, Claire, I do want to tell them that they can join you in the new year on January 12th, and I put that in the chat. You'll be in conversation with Dr. Amy Robbins, who was part of our Phoenix Rising series. I also put in the chat for those of you who want to be with us on December 25th on Christmas Day. Please join us to be with another Boricua, another Puerto Rican. Her name is Juana Morales. She's based in Boston, and she's a wonderful healing practitioner. She's done programs for us before. Join us for that. Dara, anything else we should plug?
Well, do you want to mention the African diaspora event in case anybody on this call?
For
would
those of
be-
you who are of African descent, you can join us on tomorrow, December 16th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific Time. It's one of our community forums. We've held them for the LGBTQ+ community. We've held one for the Latinx community and for Asian American communities. So if you know someone or if you are of African descent, please sign up for that. And you can find that also on our website, letsreimagine.org. Claire, Wilfred, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wishing you all a Happy New Year if we don't see you before that, okay?
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.